Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
The hall was immaculate, decorated with a mix of elegance and nostalgia. Photos of Karen and James filled every corner, from moments in their youth to more recent portraits, showing the couple on trips, at family gatherings, and in community events. The tables were set with fine dishes and crystal glasses that reflected the soft glow of the hanging lights. In the center, a large cake adorned with white flowers symbolized the 30 years of marriage everyone had come to celebrate. The guests chatted excitedly, raised their glasses, and made a point of expressing their admiration for the couple. "They are living proof that true love exists," one of Karen's friends remarked to a group listening closely. James, wearing a cordial smile, greeted everyone, while Karen, always elegant, moved naturally among the tables, making sure everyone was comfortable. In everyone's eyes, they were the perfect example of a strong, happy partnership. When the clock struck 8, a murmur spread through the hall. James stood up, adjusting the microphone in his hands. The clinking of silverware against glasses asked for silence, and all eyes turned to him. His discreet smile seemed to hide an emotion only he understood at that moment. "Tonight is a special night," he began, his voice steady but slightly emotional. He looked at Karen, who was seated at the main table, and continued, 30 years ago, we promised to face everything life threw at us together. And here we are, after all this time, celebrating not just our love but also the strength that's kept us together." The guests applauded, and Karen smiled, though something in James's gaze sparked a quiet unease in her. He went on to share funny and tender moments from their story, drawing laughter and sighs from the crowd. Every word seemed carefully chosen, yet Karen felt there was something else, a subtle shadow hidden between the lines of his speech. In spite of the warmth in his words, the way he looked at her, as if measuring her every move, made her sense something was off. When James finished, the applause echoed through the hall. He thanked everyone and walked over to Karen, offering his hand to help her up. "Now, let's dance," he said in a gentle tone but with an intensity only she noticed. Karen agreed, letting him guide her to the center of the hall as the band began playing a soft melody. They moved gracefully, as if they had rehearsed for that moment. James held Karen firmly, their steps in perfect sync. The music seemed to transport the guests back to a time when love felt simple and everlasting. They danced under everyone's admiring gaze, like a couple that had weathered time and adversity. But while they moved their feet, James's eyes told a different story. He stared at Karen, and though he kept smiling, there was something piercing in his gaze, as if he wanted to see past the surface and into some hidden truth. Karen felt the weight of that moment. Applause and whispers all around were muffled by a tense silence only she seemed to notice. The dance ended with an elegant spin, and James pulled her back close. He leaned in just enough for his voice to reach her ears alone. "I hope you're enjoying the party," he said softly. But the words, seemingly innocent, felt like a riddle loaded with tension that made her uneasy. When they stepped apart, Karen noticed a different gleam in James's eyes. It wasn't the glow of love and celebration she was used to, it was something colder, more calculated. She struggled to keep smiling, but the feeling that something was about to happen followed her like a persistent shadow. The music still echoed through the hall, but to Karen, it sounded distant, as if the sound were muffled by an invisible tension only she felt. As they returned to the main table, James kept smiling and waving at the guests, but his hand on hers was just slightly firmer than usual, almost rigid. When they sat down, Karen saw he had replaced the warmth from a few minutes ago with a cold, steady look, like he was waiting for the right moment to do something she couldn't predict. "Can we talk for a moment?" he said in a low, controlled voice, weighted enough to make Karen hesitate before answering. She nodded slightly, trying to keep her composure. James leaned in closer so no one around them could hear. "How long did you think you could hide this from me, Karen?" The impact of those words hit Karen like a cold wave. Her heart raced, and the nausea she'd felt during the dance returned in full force. She blinked quickly, trying to stay calm as her mind struggled to figure out what he actually knew. "What are you talking about, James?" she asked, hoping she sounded confident, but her voice trembled, giving her away. James leaned in even more, bringing his face close to hers. He looked like someone who'd spent sleepless nights, his eyes filled with exhaustion and pent-up anger. "David," he said, pronouncing the name slowly and almost venomously. "How long has this been going on?" Karen froze. David's name echoed in her head, mixing with the music and the murmuring around them. She knew James never confronted anyone without proof. He was methodical, careful, and if he was speaking now, it was because he had something solid. "It's not what you think," she tried to say, but James interrupted with a bitter smile, a harsh contrast to how the guests saw him that night. "Not what I think." He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms but still keeping his voice down. "Then explain why I saw the messages on your phone. Why you had to meet him so many times, Karen. You thought I wouldn't notice? That after 30 years, I wouldn't know when something was wrong?" Karen felt her face burn, not just from the accusation but because she had, in fact, underestimated James. She searched for the right words, something that could lessen the damage, but knew anything she said now would seem like an excuse. "James, I never wanted to hide anything from you. David, he recently lost his wife, and I was just trying to help him. That's all it was. I swear." He shook his head slowly, as if trying to process her words. "Help him? Is that what you were doing, Karen? Because to me, it looks like something else. It looks like betrayal." The word landed like a final blow, heavy and full of hurt. Karen felt tears building up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall here, in front of everyone. She grabbed his arm, trying to bring some humanity back to that moment. "James, please. Not here. Not like this." But he gently pulled away, his expression hardening further. "You want me to keep quiet?" he asked. "After all this? Maybe that's what you always wanted, isn't it? That I stay blind, silent, while you did whatever you wanted." Karen looked around. Even though they were speaking softly, some people were starting to notice something was off. The forced smile she wore began to crumble. "It wasn't like that, James. It never was." Her voice was a mix of pleading and despair. He stared at her for a few long seconds, then stood up abruptly. "This isn't over, Karen," he said before walking away from the table and disappearing into the crowd. She stayed there, seated, her hands trembling, feeling the curious stares turned on her as she tried to understand how the night meant to celebrate 30 years of marriage had turned into a silent nightmare. Karen remained seated, paralyzed, as the chatter in the hall grew around her. Some people whispered, casting discreet glances, but she felt like everyone was focused on her, waiting for some confirmation of the suspicions forming in their minds. Her fingers trembled over the napkin in her lap, and her heart pounded so hard she feared anyone could hear it. She tried to pull herself together. Taking a deep breath, she stood up slowly and forced a smile as she walked around the hall, responding to greetings from acquaintances as if nothing had happened. Each step was measured, every word deliberate. Inside, she was in turmoil. Where was James? What was he planning to do? And most importantly, how could she contain what seemed like a ticking bomb? Karen spotted her best friend, Margaret, who seemed suspicious about her strange behavior. "Are you okay, Karen?" Margaret asked, touching her arm gently. Karen smiled, but couldn't hide the unease in her eyes. "Of course, Margaret. I'm just a bit tired. Putting this all together was more exhausting than I thought." Margaret narrowed her eyes, clearly not convinced, but decided not to push. "Well, everyone's talking about how perfect this party is. You and James really know how to create memories." Karen almost choked on those words. Memories sounded like a cruel irony right now. Meanwhile, James was on the other side of the hall, leaning against a table near the bar. He watched everything from a distance, his dark gaze fixed on David, who was chatting with some of Karen's co-workers. David looked relaxed, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. Every laugh that came out of David's mouth felt like a punch to James, who gripped his glass so tightly it seemed it might break. When James finally moved, it was as if the energy in the hall shifted. He walked toward David, his steps slow and determined, never taking his eyes off the man. Karen saw this from afar and felt a surge of panic in her chest. "Please, don't do this here," she mumbled to herself, but it was already too late. James stopped a few steps away from David, who at last noticed his presence. David turned, smiling politely, but the smile faded as soon as he saw James's expression. "James," David said, extending a hand in greeting. "Nice to see you." James ignored the outstretched hand, leaning slightly forward. "Nice to see me, David," he began in a low voice, thick with tension. "I don't think you should feel so comfortable here. After all, this is my wedding anniversary celebration." David blinked, confused, then gave a nervous smile. "Of course, it's a lovely party. Congratulations on 30 years. 30 years you clearly didn't respect," James cut in, his words razor-sharp. The hum of the crowd around them died suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. David tried to keep his composure, but James's words were impossible to ignore. "What are you talking about, James? Do you really want me to explain it here?" James shot back, his voice a bit louder, attracting more curious looks. "Maybe I should, since you had no problem crossing boundaries with my wife." Karen rushed across the hall as fast as she could, but every step felt too slow. She arrived just as David began stammering an answer. "James, this is a misunderstanding." "I would never." "A misunderstanding?" James interrupted again, now practically shouting. "You think texts and secret meetings are some kind of misunderstanding? Like none of this has consequences?" Karen put a hand on James's arm, trying to calm him. "Please, not here. Not like this." But he ignored her completely, still focused on David. "You destroyed my trust, David. And you, Karen," he turned to her, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath at once. "You broke everything we built." Karen tried to speak, but no words came out. Shame and guilt overwhelmed her, and all she could do was look at James and David, while the tension around them reached a boiling point. Suddenly, James stepped back, throwing the napkin he was holding onto the table. "This party is over for me. I hope you two enjoy the rest of the night, since you seem so close." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and left the hall, leaving Karen and David frozen under everyone's judgmental gaze. The silence that followed was almost as deafening as James's outburst. Karen felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her, but what hurt the most was the emptiness James left behind when he walked out, taking with him the certainty that something had been irreparably lost that night. The hall remained in an uneasy hush, with the guests exchanging uncomfortable looks and trying to act as though they hadn't just witnessed James's outburst. Karen, however, felt utterly alone, even surrounded by dozens of people. Her eyes stayed on the door through which James had disappeared. His absence lingered like an invisible scar in the air. David tried to say something, but Karen raised a hand, asking for silence. She knew that anything he said would only make things worse right now. Her mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions, shame, anger, sadness. She felt the judgment in every glance, even from those who avoided looking at her directly. To them, the perfection of the couple they admired had shattered in seconds, like a glass falling and breaking to pieces. Taking a deep breath, Karen made an impulsive decision: she needed answers. Without worrying about the consequences, she left the hall, ignoring the concerned questions from friends and family. The cold night air felt like a slap to her face, but she kept going. Her quick steps led her to the parking lot, where she found James next to the car, his hands resting on the roof as if trying to cope with the weight of his emotions. "James." Karen's voice cut through the stillness of the night. He turned slowly, his face lit only by the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. There was pain in his eyes, but also something else, a mix of anger and disillusionment she had never seen before. "Karen, why are you here?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Haven't you done enough damage?" His words hit her hard, but she didn't back down. Instead, she took a few more steps, keeping enough distance between them but close enough to look him in the eye. "I'm not running from this, James. Not now. You're accusing me of terrible things, but you don't understand everything that happened." James let out a bitter laugh. "I don't understand. Karen, I saw the messages. I heard the rumors. And tonight, in that room, looking at you and him, everything made sense." Karen closed her eyes for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I never wanted to hurt you. Never. What happened with David it was a mistake, yes. But not the way you think. I was trying to help a man who lost everything. He was broken, and I got more involved than I should have. But it never meant I stopped loving you." James shook his head, like he was trying to block out her words. "Help him? That's what you call it? Karen, if that were all, you would have told me. But you kept it a secret. 4 months. You lied, and now you want me to believe it was all innocent?" She took a step forward, tears threatening to fall. "I was scared, James. Scared of how you'd react. And yes, I messed up. But I never crossed the line you think I did. Never." He looked at her in silence for a long time, like he was trying to decide if he believed her. Finally, he sighed and looked away. "You know what hurts most, Karen? Not just what you did, it's what it says about us. 30 years, and you didn't trust me enough to be honest." She felt those words like an avalanche. "Do you think this was easy for me? I lost my footing, James. I tried to be everything to everyone, and in the process, I lost what really mattered." "And now?" he asked, meeting her eyes again. "What's left, Karen? Because to me, all of this feels like a lie." She stepped closer, stopping just a bit away from him. "Whatever we decide to save is what's left. I know I broke our trust, but I also know I don't want to lose you. I don't want everything we built to be destroyed by one mistake. But I need to know if you still want to try." James drew a long breath, looking at Karen like he was trying to see beyond what was in front of him. "I don't know, Karen. I need time. I need space. Because right now, all I see is the woman who broke me on what should have been the happiest day of our lives." He got into the car, gently closing the door without slamming it. Karen stayed there in the empty parking lot, watching the car's taillights fade into the distance. The party was still going on, but for her, the night was irreversibly over. Karen remained there for long minutes, the cold night wind brushing against her face, the crushing silence reflecting her own confusion. With each second that passed, she felt the weight of her choices growing heavier, pressing down on her like a world collapsing around her. James was gone, leaving behind an almost tangible emptiness, and now, alone, Karen realized that being by herself was far more devastating than any outside judgment. Eventually, she decided to go back inside, even though it meant facing curious looks and whispered comments. Walking through the space filled with muted conversations felt like walking through a silent courtroom. Some people turned their eyes away, not wanting to be obvious, while others didn't bother hiding it. Karen knew she was at the center of every conversation. David stood in a corner of the hall, visibly uncomfortable. He tried to look busy talking to a small group, but his stiff posture and the way he darted glances at Karen showed his anxiety. When she noticed him, something inside her stirred. It was anger, maybe not just at him, but also at herself, for letting the situation spin out of control. She walked toward him with firm steps, ignoring the others staring. Once she was close, the few people around him stepped back, sensing this wasn't a conversation for them to hear. "David," she began, her voice low but determined. He turned, and his expression softened, like he was relieved she was there. "Karen, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this," she raised her hand, cutting him off. "No. Let's not do this here. This isn't about you, David. It never was. It's about me, about the choices I made and the consequences they brought. I took on a role that wasn't mine, and now I'm paying for it." David frowned, looking confused. "I don't get it. You were helping me. You were the only person who cared about me when I needed it most." "And that's the problem," she answered, her voice trembling a bit. "I cared more than I should have. Not because you were wrong to need help, but because I neglected what mattered most to me. I used your pain as an excuse to run from my own problems. And now I've lost something I might never get back." David seemed like he wanted to respond, but no words came. He knew anything he said might only worsen the situation. Karen didn't wait. Without looking back, she left him there, alone, and went back to the main table, where the night was still in full swing but felt more like a distant backdrop to her. Hours later, when the party finally ended, Karen went home. The house was quiet, almost oppressively so. She walked through the hallway, her eyes on the photographs on the walls. Each one reminded her of happy moments that now felt so far away. Her hand touched a particular frame, one of her and James on a beach trip early in their marriage. They were laughing, their hair mussed by the wind, their eyes shining with a happiness that seemed unbreakable. She picked up the photo and sat on the couch, looking at it like she was trying to reach out for something lost. That's when she noticed an envelope on the coffee table. Her name was written on it in James's unmistakable handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. Each word hit her straight in the heart. "Karen, today, our party was supposed to mark everything we've built together. But instead, it revealed how far we've drifted. I know life isn't perfect, and mistakes happen. But what hurts the most isn't the mistake itself, it's the fact that you felt you couldn't trust me enough to be honest. I don't know what the future holds for us. Right now, all I know is that I need time. I need to figure out if there's still an us worth fighting for. And you, Karen, need to decide who you really are and what you want from life. I hope we can find a way to get through this someday, but today, I'm not strong enough to try." James, Karen's tears finally came, hot and endless, as she clutched the letter like it was her last connection to the man she loved. As devastating as it was, she knew James was right. Her choices hadn't just hurt him, they shattered the trust that held their relationship together. And now, for the first time in years, Karen was completely alone, left to face the consequences of her actions. It was a bitter but inevitable lesson. Sometimes, love isn't enough to fix what's been broken. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.